All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar, which will focus on patient and family perspectives on the medical malpractice process. We will address all questions at the end of today's session, but please feel free to submit them at any time. We'll be monitoring that and we'll bring them up at the end today. I would like to start by introducing today's moderator, Caitlin Harrington. Caitlin is a physician attorney in Seattle. She is a practicing internal medicine doctor who also works on communication resolution program focused projects with Sweet Law and with us at the Collaborative for Accountability Improvement. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you, Nicole, and good morning to everyone who's joining us. Thank you all for joining us again. Welcome to the third in a four-part webinar series, which is focused on exploring the perspectives of those involved in medical malpractice litigation. This series is brought to you by the Collaborative for Accountability and Improvement's Attorney Alliance, and over the course of 4 months has included conversations with clinicians, attorneys, patients, and families. In today's webinar, I am honored to welcome Dr. Jeff Goldenberg and Naomi Kirtner, founders of Talia's Voice. Over the next hour, they will provide powerful insight into the impact of malpractice litigation on patients and families who have been harmed by medical error. Jeff and Naomi co-founded Talia's Voice, projects for patient safety, after their daughter Talia died from medical errors. Talia's Voice seeks to change the culture in medicine so that the voice of each patient is heard. Naomi completed a master's program in counseling psychology, while Jeff is a family physician with more than 25 years in practice. They are active with the Washington Patient Safety Coalition, the Oregon Task Force on Resolution of Adverse Healthcare Incidents, the Collaborative for Accountability and Improvement, and the PACT Collaborative. Naomi and Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. To begin, would you be able to share with us Talia's story?
Thanks, Caitlin, and good morning to all of you out there. We're in a different venue for us. We're actually on Orcas Island with our family and had a bit of an internet snafu, so we're using our local public library, and there may be a few distractions walk behind us or get reflected. Anyways, before talking about the legal system, as Caitlin alluded to, we'd like to talk to you about what happened to our daughter, Talia Goldenberg, and we hope that'll provide some context for the discussion that we're going to have later with Caitlin.
So, sparkly-eyed and luminous, Talia died almost exactly 8 years ago from preventable medical errors. And ours is a really complex story of how everything can go wrong unless someone, anyone on a medical team, is willing to do the right thing and just listen. We're committed to sharing our story to help bring about much needed change. At the same time, please bear in mind that this is not just a story. It is the reality we live with every day, that our very real Talia was killed in a supposedly safe space. And Talia is not just a statistic. With her cheerful disposition, discerning mind, and irrepressible spirit, she was a person who lived and laughed, played and pursued, and was beloved to many. Energetic, physically fearless, athletically gifted, determined, open, and affectionate, Talia was the most creative person I've ever met, someone who lived by thinking outside the box. She was known everywhere for her work ethic, which she applied in all situations, whether it was rock climbing, slide tackling in soccer, pole vaulting, skiing in deep powder, linear algebra, art history, or creating art. She covered so many miles across campus on crutches in Minnesota in January. She was tenacious. Talia was by nature loyal, intuitive, and ironically in the end, a consummate listener who was unafraid of big feelings, always a safe harbor for everyone. She had friends of all ages and backgrounds. Being part of a growing family meant everything to Talia. She adored her adopted brother and sisters and had a special relationship with each of her siblings.
Talia had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, also known as EDS. It's a disease that's characterized by really stretchy connective tissue. And over time, ligaments get looser and they can stretch to a point where they no longer stabilize the joints. In Talia's case, that meant full time in a knee brace, but As you can see, she worked hard at not letting that slow her down. Nevertheless, when muscles are forced to step in and do the work of ligaments, they don't do a very good job of holding the joints in place. And so, like many EDS patients, Talia ended up with more and more pain and instability in and around her joints. Because of instability in her neck, which left her experiencing near constant headaches and terrible neck pain, Talia saw EDS experts from across the country. Their consensus was that the top 4 vertebrae in her neck should be fused to the base of her skull, and they would do that using plates and screws. And the surgery was going to be done in Seattle by a renowned neurosurgeon. Talia's art is a window into both who she was and how she felt in her EDS body. She entered Carleton College as a pre-med student, but pretty much became consumed with and was consumed by every art medium she encountered in classes there. And that included painting and marble sculpture, printmaking, bookbinding, and paper arts, metal sculpture, pen and ink mixed with watercolors. Friends tell stories of visiting with Talia at the art building on campus almost any time of day or night. After graduation, Talia was experiencing more and more pain, and partly because of that, she produced an incredible amount of work. The most remarkable thing about Talia was that while she was often joyful and always engaged with those around her, she was able to address her pain, fears, and the dark despair of life with a chronic illness through her art. And I'm just going to play a couple more slides for you to see more of her art. One physician friend, when educating doctors about what life is like when dealing with the chronic pain experienced by so many patients with EDS, simply puts up this photo to show how Talia looked on the outside, and this photo to show how she was feeling on the inside. Talia was able to express all sides of herself in her art. Through depictions of her brokenness, Talia demonstrated just how whole she was.
So what then happened to Talia? Surgeries like the spinal fusion Talia had in 2014 naturally come with risks, but the risks 23-year-old Talia signed off on were unrelated to those that killed her.
Talia's doctors were not aware that they had dislocated her jaw in the operating room, most likely when the anesthesiologist intubated her. After surgery, Talia's jaw was locked, so her mouth could barely open. Her neck was now fused and she couldn't bend her neck. She was lying flat on her back and frightened. She was struggling to breathe due to a swollen airway, and that left her sounding like Darth Vader. As a doctor, I knew that she was in grave danger. Talia would be nearly impossible to intubate if her airway occluded. She could die. I alerted everyone to this brewing emergency, and so did Talia.
In the early morning hours after surgery, during rounds we weren't told were happening, Talia asked her neurosurgeon why she still couldn't breathe and what could be done to fix her jaw. Rather than examine her or call in a specialist, he told her that nothing he had done could have caused her jaw troubles, and she'd just have to see another specialist or doctor upon discharge. As for her difficulty breathing, he dismissed it entirely and wrote orders to transfer her out of the ICU. Then he left to catch a plane without ever speaking to Talia's ICU doctors.
Talia's words still haunt me. I wish you'd been here, Papa. They wouldn't listen to me. And they didn't listen to me either. After 25 years of working to keep my patients alive, I would watch my daughter die of the exact preventable causes I repeatedly urged her caregivers to address.
How could Talia have a team of physicians who didn't communicate with each other about her care? And what's going on in hospitals when non-physician staff are too intimidated to speak up? Like Talia's nurse, who, caught between Talia's needs and the doctor's plans, never questioned the plans and quit advocating for Talia, or the speech pathologist, the one person who examined Talia's airway, who detailed Talia's precarious breathing issues in the chart, yet never talked to anybody in person about Talia's critical situation.
We asked every provider for help. Each refused to listen or believe, and there were at least 11 missed opportunities to save Talia's life.
Imagine Talia's terror when 22 hours after she emerged from surgery, her airway did close. She looked back and forth from me to Jeff, frantic. Her eyes bulged. Then she thrashed like a person being strangled. In her last conscious moments, Talia was bursting with the need for air, knowing she was suffocating, aware she'd been abandoned, that she was going to die. And then she went still.
It took 10 minutes for the code team to assemble, 20 to do a CRIC, procedure to open her airway that I kept shouting for now, and had been urging everybody to perform from the moment Talia's breathing troubles began. But I was powerless to get them to act, and I knew what each subsequent minute without oxygen meant for Talia. Cerebral palsy, organic brain syndrome, irreparable brain damage, brain death. Waves of nausea just kept washing over me. By the time an anesthesiologist finally arrived and performed the CRIC, Talia lay comatose in a permanent vegetative state. As the days passed, we sang to Talia, held her tiny hand in ours, stroked her hair and soft skin, cuddled next to her, and wept. For 9 long days, we had to be perfectly polite to those same providers to ensure our girl received optimal care. And then, with zero chance of recovery, we pulled life support, staying by Talia's side for 37 grueling hours until she died. And 8 years later, we're still reeling from this nightmare and haven't slept through a night since.
I have a hard time even calling what happened to Talia errors. Her providers made the choice not to listen. Providers everywhere do this all the time, under pressure to get to the OR or on with their day, to be ever more efficient. This pervasive culture of not listening is rampant. It's scary when you think that every one of us will be a patient one day. Yet the capacity to listen always exists. And we know that listening saves lives. Unfortunately, we are living the reality that not listening can kill, which is why today we very much appreciate your willingness to be here to listen.
Before we turn back to Caitlin for our discussion, we'd like to finish up by telling you a bit about what happened after Talia died. None of the responsible parties ever apologized to us, not the hospital, nor any provider. We didn't know at the time of Talia's death about communication and resolution programs, but we did understand what constitutes ethical and unethical behavior. We understood morality, transparency, accountability, justice. We experienced none of these things. We witnessed everything. We and Talia understood it all as it was unfolding. So to have these folks take no ownership was egregious. It's a betrayal in the deepest sense of the word. And the impact of that harm is still continuing today.
I'm a person who believes in restorative justice. And so even though I didn't know what CRPs were, I kind of tried to conduct my own. 3.5 years after Talia's death, I contacted the hospital and returned for a conversation with the CEO and CMO to see if we could establish some kind of relationship. But that didn't go very well or go anywhere, really. I learned the hard way that the impetus for a CRP must come from the hospital if it's to be successful. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. This encounter didn't reestablish my trust in the institution or in the way medicine is practiced. It simply reinforced my bitterness and solidified my outrage.
We know from experience that how an institution or a provider responds to their errors will make a significant difference in the lives of patients and families. And really the question is, when are those who work within the medical system going to step up and acknowledge that they know it too? That's it for the formal part, and Caitlin will turn things back over to you.
Absolutely. Jeff and Naomi, I just want to sort of take a moment and just say how powerful that was, and thank you. Thank you for sharing such a horrific story with us. Thank you. I do want to start our conversation now by exploring the trauma of the adversarial legal process that we've spoken about before, and how it further harms patients and families, which were harmed by medical error to begin with. So I'd welcome your thoughts on this question to start.
So I think that it's an interesting thing. It's been said that the first harm that occurs is the harm that happens to the patient and family with the initial incident. Some people refer to the second harm, which is more preventable, as being what occurs when the institution, the providers, don't come forward and take responsibility and accept responsibility for what's happened. And it seems to us like there's a third harm, which is if after all of that, people choose to interact with the legal system over what happened, because it is a very painful process to proceed on behalf of your loved one or for yourself if you've been the injured party.
Well, and so much about the legal system produces its own trauma and further trauma. One of the things I think about it this way, you really have to be silent when you are in any kind of lawsuit or involved with the legal system. And one of the ways we make sense of our world is by telling stories. We tell our story, and after somebody dies, you tell it over and over again. And so to be asked to be silent was agonizing and painful, but stopped us from making meaning out of the situation.